Hi, my name is Dr. Roger Cohen, and I'm here today to talk about housing insecurity and the residential segregation problems that we have in our society. Housing in California right now, excluding Hawaii, California has the highest average property prices and rentals in all of the United States. Since housing is the most essential human need, high housing costs constitute a political concern here in California, and this is something that we need to be very concerned about, especially if we want to have a society that has just and equal housing affordability for all people. California's housing insecurity problems have many different layers of problems and issues with it. The California's economy is one of the largest and most productive in the United States. It's also one of the most productive in the world. The situation of housing insecurity in California, though, cannot be attributed to economic growth or productivity. There are considerably more specific causes that can be resolved much more quickly than an economic crisis from our productivity and our economy production and growth. The most significant factor contributing to housing insecurity in California is the consistent and persistent rise in home prices. Many low-income individuals and families in California endure housing instability due to a decline in income, especially during the COVID-19 crisis that society just went through. We have a problem with poverty and housing. The Census Bureau reports that 12.5% of all Californians are poor. However, when the supplemental poverty measure, SPM, is considered, 18.1% of all Californians are poor. And that's a significant amount of the population of California that lives in poverty. The SPM is an index that considers crucial factors not included in the official poverty measurements. And these extra factors are important to determine the quality of life for people in California. Some statistics that need to be looked at. According to data from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, there's a shortage of over 1 million affordable houses, rental houses, for extremely low-income tenants. Californians live in houses twice as crowded as the national average as of 2018. And California has a shortage of 3.5 million housing units. Almost 200,000 new homes must be constructed annually to meet the current demand for housing in California. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis estimated that the average home price in California in 2021 was $683,996. According to a study by the Hoover Institute, fewer than 1/3 of Californian families can afford the median housing price. And as we know and see, by 2023, the housing prices are shifting still upwards in many housing areas of California. Approximately 3/4 of Los Angeles is dominated by a single ethno-racial group. Housing becomes discriminatory when we start looking at single areas of ethnocentricity within the housing market. Now, residential segregation becomes a problem within the housing policies and the housing market in California. The growth of residential segregation is explained by the socioeconomic inequality, group prejudice, and housing discrimination found within California. Explanations of segregation based on socioeconomic status primarily refer to income disparities. It creates diversity, and it also creates a society which people are not diverse because of affordability. Differences in money and status frequently cause residential segregation, as Hispanics, African Americans, and other minorities work in lower status or lower paying occupations and receive a substandard education. You could read some of my other work on the role of charter or voucher systems in California, how they would be beneficial for creating a less discriminatory education system for children in California. Income disparities are considered the leading source of residential segregation. On the other hand, ethnic and racial characteristics mostly determine ethno-racial residential segregation. African American homeowners prefer to reside in communities that are more segregated by their race rather than in neighborhoods with better circumstances inhabited by other races. We have seen a larger shift of having greater discriminatory housing areas over the last 30 years, and people are living more and more according to their own ethnic and racial demographics instead of integrating as historically was happening after the 1964 and 65 Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. There are numerous political and historical causes for residential segregation based on racial preferences, all of which can be categorized as group prejudice. Racial segregation, after reaching its peak in the 1970s, Black and white neighborhood segregation has steadily declined. Since the 1980s, Hispanic and white neighborhood segregation, though, has increased. And among major communities, Asians are the least segregated ethno-racial group in California. In 1970, 89% of whites resided in neighborhoods where more than 70% of residents were white. By 2014, this percentage had plummeted to 37%. By 1970s, and in the 1970s, 69% of Blacks lived in neighborhoods with more than 70% Black residents. However, in 2014, only 16% of Blacks did. Crime and residential segregation are also part of problems that create discriminatory problems within housing in California. The violent crime rate tends to be higher in neighborhoods where disadvantage is prevalent. Numerous studies have repeatedly demonstrated that neighborhoods with a greater income inequality have higher crime rates compared to their income. That the disruption of social cohesion is the most significant social problem created by residential segregation and income inequality in neighborhoods. If residents in a neighborhood lack trust in one another, they will be less eager to work for the common good. This has an impact on education. There are two negative effects of high housing costs that have an impact on children's schooling. School achievement is underserved in neighborhoods, and it is worse than in less impoverished neighborhoods. Less impoverished neighborhoods have higher property taxes and have a higher rate of building for schools. When families regularly move neighborhoods because they cannot afford rent, and they are moving more frequently due to housing insecurity, and they are in more unfavorable neighborhood conditions, students frequently change schools, and this also creates a disruption in their education. In California, the absence of affordable housing is one of the most significant variables affecting the academic success of low-income students. We have many considerations that we have to make. Housing insecurity and residential segregation are complex social phenomena with lasting effects that will leave generations of students impacted. With such a high amount of students in poverty and such a high amount of housing costs and the high rate of unaffordability for housing in California, we'll have generational problems that must be dealt with. The segregation crisis, which has long-term effects, cannot be resolved fast. We can't just stop segregation because housing inaffordability has created the ability to not be together and working for an integrated society. There are rapid and readily implemented solutions that can reduce the high housing costs that exacerbate the social crisis that we must be looking at in order to move forward. As ethno-racial neighborhoods in California become more divided, advanced high-income groups rely on their housing privileges even more. In privileged neighborhoods, the perception that the phenomena of high crime and poverty in segregated communities result from individual character traits and would ultimately gain momentum. As we are in California at this time, and as society becomes more unaffordable, we want to do the best that we can to provide a just and equitable society for all people to have access to education and affordable housing, so that the housing crisis does not create generational and long-term impacts for all people and all residents in California. I thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to future discussions with you.